Everything is breaking news all the time now.
Yeah. It's like a never-ending cycle of breaking news. Do you think that can change? Do you think it should change?
I personally don't think it will. Whether it should or not is a different question, but I don't think it will, just because everything is so newsworthy. We kind of entered into age in 2020 where like nobody really knows what's going to happen going forward. It was the same with, the Spanish influenza. When that, pandemic decimated a bunch of people, it was a whole new world for all of them that survived. And so now we have a whole new world again after a pandemic with wars, with whatever. So we really don't know what's going to happen. So I don't think it will go back, just because they make so much money off of everything being breaking news and keeping people's attention through advertising or whatever. So if you stop that breaking news and those emotional stories, you don't have the viewers.
Hey Grace, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing good. Before we get started, if you want to let the people know who you are, what you do, any likes and dislikes in personal life, future aspirations, the spiel, whatever you want to share about yourself.
Sounds good. I'm Grace. I'm Grace Wray. Prateek and I used to be co-workers here at UCO at the International House, and now I work for I have a Master's of Education here from UCO. I just graduated back in May, super exciting. Likes and dislikes. I really like my 3 dogs and traveling, and dislikes would be, I really hate mashed potatoes. They're so nasty. I just hate that, and spaghetti squash. Like, those are the 2 foods I'll never touch. But yeah, I'm from Texas and real proud of that. And if you know me in real life, you've probably heard me say that a lot.
What is spaghetti squash?
So it's like a yellow squash thing, but when you open it, it's like all stringy inside, like spaghetti, and you kind of cook it in the microwave. You kind of steam it a little bit and it looks like spaghetti.
Interesting. So is it made out of squash?
Yes, like it just comes naturally all stringy like spaghetti.
Interesting. I've never heard of that before. Why do you hate mashed potatoes?
It's just, I think it's a texture. It's just watery, and I don't know. Spaghetti squash has a similar texture to mashed potatoes.
So it's more of a texture thing, not so
yes,
much
I think so. Yeah.
Gotcha. Talk to me about the 3 dogs. I know. Wait, didn't you have 2, or is it 3? Oh, I guess you had 2, and then
got a 3rd. Yeah.
Awesome.
So one dog I have, he's a short-haired collie, a smooth collie. His name is Smalls, but he weighs 104 pounds right now. Smalls is up from a baseball movie I really like called The Sandlot. And then there's Max. He's a good old American brown dog is what you call him. Husky something mix. We don't really know, but he's named after Secret Life of Pets. And then Bruce is Bruce Wayne. And he's a little French bulldog, English bulldog rescue mix of some kind.
Yeah, I know you've brought Bruce over to the office a few times when we used to work together. But congratulations on graduating, by the way. What's life after graduation been like, and what does it feel like to be finally done with school?
I still haven't quite gotten over the fact I don't have to write essays, that I can just like relax when I get off work. I can just, play video games and don't have to think about like, man, I should be doing something. So it's been good just being able to dedicate time to like working and developing professional relationships versus being like, oh, these are all like part of my academic program. This is part of my school. It is all just professional and then kind of my personal time, it's nice. I haven't had that experience in, the past 6 years.
Right, because I think you got back into school right after your bachelor's degree, right?
I only had, the summer off and then starting my master's degree right after.
Right. Because I think when you have a little time away from school and you come back, I guess you get to experience life after school for a short period of time, but then again, you're like, gotta get back to doing homework again.
Right.
Yeah, because I felt that when I was transitioning back into coming back to school, and I remember that being a bit of a mental hurdle initially. So I guess it feels better to be like working an adult job in some sense.
Right, yeah.
Because as fresh graduates, we only have most of our experience in school environments, working school jobs that honestly don't pay that well. But again, hey-ho, I guess that's just the landscape itself.
Oh yeah, I mean, because I was like, when I was about to graduate, I was like, I want to do a PhD. I know that's like the next step in my journey. I want that higher ed degree. I'll go look at it. I have not made any steps towards that since I've graduated because I'm like, this is so nice. I don't want to even think about having to write a thesis or anything like that.
Do you think you'll ever?
Someday, just maybe not for a while. I'd like to build up, my savings and just kind of learn how to really work where it's not connected to my work. Or where it's not connected to my schoolwork, if that makes sense.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because you knew my work history. It was all here at UCO, and I felt like my work here at UCO very much informed what I did academically and vice versa. So it's nice to like have a separation of like, this is just my work and doesn't dictate like how I'm setting myself up for my future, if that makes sense.
In some sense, would you say that sort of change of interest, or is it, how would you define that, I guess, is...
The change is probably just maybe focusing more on like developing skill and savings and, you know, learning to invest versus like developing academically and developing those soft skills, if that makes sense. It was just like a different area of focus. So there's just a different path with like the job I have now versus the job I used to have.
Because I think the realization that I'm starting to come to, and after having conversations with funnily enough, with an Uber driver, a lot of the times when we pick a certain major to go to school, a lot of the time, not always, not for everybody, I don't want to try and generalize it this way, but it's dictated out of things that we don't want to do versus things that we want to do sometimes. I mean, it applies to me in my case. Like, I did not want to become a doctor. So I chose forensic science. And I mean, I love it. I love parts of it. So I'm interested and I'm continuing to do it. But you think about it, or at least I don't know if it applies to people over here in America as well, or if it's just like an international student thing. Because I think this person that I was talking to was also like from Somalia, I think. So I was like, I resonate with that a lot because it makes sense. I mean, not saying I don't like what I'm doing, but it wasn't a consequence of wanting to do it, if that makes, or loving it, essentially.
I get what you mean, because it's like there are things I wanted to do, but I definitely know what I did not want to do. Like I did not want to do STEM. I hate math. Just no. So that's why I'm completely liberal arts, and very much my choices were dictated by what I didn't want to do.
You sort of had like a bit of interest in like politics, or remind me again the specifics of what you were doing with your master's.
So my master's was a higher education interdisciplinary degree. So most of my classes were in higher education, and then other half of my classes were in international affairs. So it was mostly like global politics classes and regional politics focuses.
Right. And because we worked at the International House, that was sort of like an interest that sort of
yes.
fed itself into it. How's that interest evolved now? Like interest in global politics?
So the interest has definitely evolved because through those classes, you know, I know that like when you think of the world order politically, that the U.S. has been on the top since about the end of World War II.
Right.
But since taking like Model UN and we were chosen to be the United States, and thinking about, you know, through actual debates I was having with other students, like, oh man, we really do dictate a lot of the world, and like in places like the Security Council. Just knowing how important our political realm is here in the United States, because it does dictate a lot for what happens around the world. So just making smart choices and being an informed citizen, that definitely, I've shifted my interest since graduating maybe away from international politics to thinking about like, man, domestic politics to play a huge role in these international politics. And with, you know, it being an election year and all that stuff, it's definitely American politics are on the forefront of almost every international stage right now.
For sure, yeah, because I think this year there's a ton of elections happening around the world.
Yes.
Excuse me. I know India had their elections recently, and the results came out early this month. And I think some parts of Europe are also having elections. Like I think France had an election recently. I know Emmanuel Macron, like his party did not win. Or like, I guess I can't remember what the specifics of it was.
Mm-hmm.
Was it for his position or for like the state positions or something? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
No idea. I've not followed it well enough, so maybe I shouldn't even be talking about it. But there's a lot of elections happening this year, and I guess we're ending with the biggest one for the world.
Right.
The US elections. I guess you don't have to get into specifics if you don't want to, but what did you make of the debate that happened recently?
There wasn't much to make of it. I feel like it was very much, there was not a lot of reading into that. I did not know watching it. I learned this after the fact that the moderators were not allowed to fact check anything either candidate said. So that there was no active fact checking, and neither candidate could also consult advisors during commercial breaks or whatever. That those were part of the rules this year. And I do not want to say with 100% certainty that it wasn't that way in the past, because I don't actually know. But it just was interesting that they gave a platform to potentially two of the most powerful men in the world to just say whatever they want, and nobody can say that is not true. Because both of them, I felt like maybe needed someone to step in and say, hey, that's not true.
I wonder why they did that, because wouldn't you want to sort of be able to contest what they're saying?
You would think so, because it is a debate.
Right.
That's the whole point of it, is that you can test what other people are saying and
Yeah.
kind of trying to prove their points wrong and that you're right. But
Right.
I have no idea. I know that Trump did not show up to the last debate. He wouldn't debate Biden. I don't really remember why. I just think it wasn't worth his time. But I don't know if those rules were in place. So I don't know if those were rules to like, hey, Trump, you can come and say whatever you want. We're not fact checking, or if that was a Biden rule. I have no idea, because I know the no audience was Biden's rule. And I believe also turning off the mics when the other person is speaking was also Biden's rule.
Interesting.
So it was an interesting debate for sure. I've never seen one quite like that.
Right. Because the unfortunate, I guess, outcome of all of, not all of, or that debate itself was sort of like the age of the candidates. And
yes.
Which you think, if you think about it, like they're both 70 plus.
Yes.
Right. Which is wild to think about, that the most prosperous country in the world is being led by people who are, I hate to put it this way, but closer to their deathbed. You know?
Yeah. That's what every American is thinking right now. They're like, these are our two options. Really great.
Yeah, because, I mean, granted, I guess the systems have been built in a way where I guess there's not much of an avenue for a third person. Because I know, like, RFK Jr., is it?
Yes, there's a Kennedy on the ballot, and he's interesting too.
Yeah, he's another interesting person. I think they were arguing the fact that he should have also been given a platform to be a part of the debate. But then the way, I guess, CNN, which hosted the debate, had certain guidelines for like who could take part, and I guess they were able to sneakily put something in there that ruled him out of it or something. At least
maybe I hadn't read about that yet. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember watching someone talk about. I was like, huh,
I have to
interesting.
look that up.
Yeah, I think it was Breaking Points. It's a show that I follow where I think we've talked about this before. I don't know if we have. It's so one person is generally conservative, the other one more liberal, and they sort of talk about news topics from both angles and sort of explore a lot of different avenues that way. And I think one of the topics of conversation during the debate policies or rulings that were being set was this, of how it was ruling out the Kennedy who was taking part and so on. So I don't know, but anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I mean, if I'm wrong, please let me know. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, because it's gonna dictate what the US is gonna be for the next few years. But in some sense, we're in a stage where world politics is also heading into an interesting space, like with unfortunate wars that are happening and like countries getting power and so on and so forth. Like, it's not a unipolar world, or well, it is still a unipolar world, I guess, but we're headed in a direction where it might become multipolar. Yeah.
There's a lot of people that say that. There's a lot of people on both sides of those arguments of thinking, especially world powers like China, Russia. I think we used to think Russia before this war in Ukraine was going to become a major world power, and we just see that that's maybe not the case. Because if we throw enough money at it, it seems like Russia is kind of out of the game. But China is definitely someone we keep an eye on, but they're keeping an eye on Russia, and they're not going to do anything until I think they feel like Russia has become more successful at what they're doing. So that's kind of like where most political people are at, is like we're kind of at a stasis right now, and it will really depend on who the next president is. If we have one that's friendly towards Russia, especially, or one that's not friendly, that's kind of going to be the next step that kind of tells who the next major world powers will be, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess the other unfortunate part of all of this is that the US is fighting in proxy, right? And it feels like
we've always done that.
right. And it's being dragged out more than it should be. Again, like, I'm not saying that one or the other is right or wrong, but it's just unfortunate that all of this is being dragged out at the cost of people's lives, at the cost of Ukraine building back up, or the Israel-Gaza conflict and
Mm-hmm.
like things fixing over there
Right.
or becoming better over there, it just feels like it's getting dragged out when it doesn't need to be.
No, and I feel like the world is waiting to see who the next president will be. I don't know. I don't think that, having an election and an answer will stop those conflicts, but I do think it'll give the taxpayers, especially like some idea of what will happen, because we know that Trump is very much in favor of like cutting funding to Ukraine, and that's just not going to be a thing because he's very Russian friendly. That's been a part of his campaign since the beginning, and then Biden is not. So it's kind of like, I feel like we're either going to stay in stasis, some things will happen, we just have to see. But I feel like Congress is not making a move until we kind of see who the next leader is for the next 4 years.
Right, because I mean, it's not that far away, right? November is when usually, is November 8th the date?
I believe so. I should know this, but I think so. Yeah.
It's okay. I'll find something.
It's like the 6th or the 8th, something like that. Okay. Yeah,
one of the two. November first week or the second week of November. Anyway, that's when we'll know who will become the U.S. president.
Right.
But they don't take office until January the next year.
Because they have to confirm the votes, because it's all done through the Electoral College, and they confirm the votes that first week of January generally.
Right. And I guess if Biden is reelected, then they don't have to go through that process. But if Trump is elected, they would have to, right?
They go through every process anyway. It's just whether someone moves into the White House or moves out. That's about the difference.
Right. I guess he would probably still have to take oath and stuff in January, but he doesn't necessarily have to leave and all that kind of stuff.
No, exactly.
Right. It'd be interesting. I don't know like what to make of it, because it also affects daily lives, right, in a lot of ways. And I generally try to take the view of not being too dialed into what's happening,
right?
Because I feel like if I am too dialed in, then that just is not helpful.
It'll drive you crazy.
Right, exactly. How do you build that balance of like staying up to date but not letting it drive you crazy, essentially?
The number one thing I'm trying to implement in my own life, and I haven't gotten very far with this, is just not taking my news from social media. That is like the number one thing. That Twitter, Instagram, all of that, there's a lot of false narratives out there, and especially with the introduction of AI into social media, that it is really hard to say like, oh, this picture is emotionally moving and it has a lot of shock value, but it's not real. Or I know in the early days of the Israel-Hamas war, I think it's what they're calling it in the news now, there was a picture going around that was like a screenshot from like a 2006 war video game that was not real. And it was being circulated quite frequently. And so people are like, this was not real. This never happened. I think it was some pictures of some tanks or something like that. But they're like, yeah, this is from a video game. And they put it through AI and started circulating it. And none of it was real.
So I guess we've been in this place for a while now. But I think with the integration of AI into a lot of these social media platforms, it's become much more harder to separate what is false from what is true. Because, I mean, I guess fake news has always been like a term.
Right, but you could maybe point it out a little bit more. But with social media and everybody has a voice, which is so important. I mean, that's what our society is built on. It's hard to get away from it all because everybody is constantly posting about politics or, whatever's going on in the world at the time. But I think making sure you get it from unbiased news sources, like NPR is a pretty good one. Associated Press is a good one because they generally report first and on the facts. And making sure you see all sides, that you don't watch just one news station, and you don't need to watch it all the time. I mean, we get, updates as soon as they happen now, which can be really hard where, it used to just be like a newspaper that you'd get in the morning and maybe 3 days had passed since an update on this particular story. So it's a lot harder to disconnect now, and it's addicting to just sit there and refresh, be like, what's happening? Because it's so emotionally it appeals to the emotions so much. And so it's hard to break away or say like, I don't care about this because it's in your face all the time. So I think just kind of getting off social media is the best way to kind of balance your political intake for sure.
Right. Because I think, Twitter or X as it's known now.
Oh yeah, X.
Why did they even, anyway.
Yeah.
Let's not go there. We could if you want to, but Twitter is a dumpster fire 9 times out of 10, and I think as long as you are able to like separate whom you're following, I think you can curate your feed to make it decent enough to where you're not getting essentially rubbish fed to you. Because I know the separation that I've heard people talk about recently was making sure that you're on the For You page or on the following page instead of the For You page,
yes,
I think.
Yeah.
Because the For You page just feeds you
like the most popular stuff on X.
Right.
Yeah.
Most popular stuff that you connect to or resonate to based on the people you're following.
Mm-hmm.
But if you switch to the following tab, that only feeds you information or things that people you follow are tweeting, and not just any random Joe posting something. Yeah, I don't know. And I think with like TikTok and so on and so forth, also, it's just easier to circulate a lot of this.
Yes.
And much harder to separate. But yeah, because it's like we live in a constant cycle of breaking news, right?
Right. Everything is breaking news all the time now.
Yeah. It's like a never-ending cycle of breaking news. Do you think that can change? Do you think it should change?
I personally don't think it will. Whether it should or not is a different question, but I don't think it will, just because everything is so newsworthy. We kind of entered into age in 2020 where like nobody really knows what's going to happen going forward. It was the same with, the Spanish influenza. When that, pandemic decimated a bunch of people, it was a whole new world for all of them that survived. And so now we have a whole new world again after a pandemic with wars, with whatever. So we really don't know what's going to happen. So I don't think it will go back, just because they make so much money off of everything being breaking news and keeping people's attention through advertising or whatever. So if you stop that breaking news and those emotional stories, you don't have the viewers. So I don't think it'll ever truly go back to kind of being like, oh yeah, we don't hear breaking news every 5 minutes anymore.
Right. I guess news in its conventional sense is probably not going to be the same, because there's not a lot of people watching your CNNs or your Foxes, comparatively speaking. Like, I guess if you compare the data over the past few years.
Yeah, TV viewers are down and social media is up.
Right. Social media is up and TV viewers are down. I guess some of that comes down to cable cutting as well, because not a lot of people are using cable anymore. You can get most, if not everything you want out of YouTube.
Right.
Whether it's like YouTube TV or like Hulu TV and all those sort of platforms. But anyway, I think with the way we're consuming our news now, it becomes kind of like you said, very important to detach yourself from it. Is it something that you talk about at home, like in terms of news or something? Is it conversations that you have?
Yes, I feel like all my family does is talk about the news, which is, we all realize that is bad. Like, I know that my mom and I will be like, okay, this week we're not watching the news. Like, maybe we'll discuss something we see on our phones, but we try to stay within like maybe those top 5 stories on Apple News. Because we went to a neighborhood barbecue, and like the first thing that was brought up was a neighbor came up and said, oh, we should have put an Israel flag up. And then just launched into Trump. Not even hello. That was the opening statement. And it was like, really? So then it's just like, this is not what we want to talk about when we're, just enjoying this nice outside time and we're with our, our neighbors enjoying a meal, that we think about these things. So it's just, I know that it is so hard to detach, and just everybody is talking about it with my extended family when we talk about it, because it affects, employment. It affects, thinking about like my sister's future, my cousin's future, like what is that going to look like? And the news directly feeds into that. So I think it's really hard for us to stop talking about it, because we're constantly so future thinking, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I think you're trying to make sure that you're doing everything in your power right now to ensure a better future, right?
Right.
Or at least that's the hope. And when there's a lot of these external factors that have so much of a role to play in terms of how all of this is going to pan out, it definitely can be anxiety inducing, for lack of a better word, in a more situational sense, I suppose. Because I can't imagine like going to a party and then or a gathering and all you're talking about is politics. I mean, I know people do that.
But no, like the whole night, all you could hear was like just discussions on Trump from all angles. But it's like, we couldn't enjoy this nice little barbecue thing we were having without talking about that. We could have talked about the weather, food, going on vacation, kids, whatever. But no, it was all about Trump.
Yeah.
So that just proves how hard it is for people to disconnect. So that's not even my family. That's, neighbors and people I'm not even related to. So this is very interesting. It's community at large, I think.
How can people disconnect, in your opinion, or can they? I mean, they can, but
It's very hard. I used to put my phone at the bottom of like my sock drawer and leave it there because I just didn't want to look at it. And it's so hard because it's always, I've got one on my wrist now. It's so hard to stay unplugged, but I just think you have to make a conscious effort. I don't think it's something that's just going to happen. I think you have to tell yourself, like, my phone stays off for an hour a day, or you set those screen time limits and you limit the news app and X and Facebook and whatever else. I think you just have to make a conscious effort to leave the internet be and go outside.
Right. Touch grass, as some people might say.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I mean, the one thing that's definitely helped me also is like turning off notifications on a lot of these apps, right? Because otherwise they constantly bombard you with like, I mean, the goal of these apps is to keep you on the phone, and they succeed. In all honesty, they succeed. So you have to sort of, like you said, make those conscious decisions and like walk away from it when you can. The one thing I think about the news generally is that because we are fed so much, I guess our levels of awareness are higher.
Yes.
Because 20 years back or 30 years back, I think people would generally just accept whatever was fed to them without necessarily trying to think too much about it, right? But now I think with people knowing much more about the news in general and also knowing about how biased the news can be, I think we try to seek out more information. Maybe that's a generational thing also.
Yeah.
But we try to fact check, at least on a very foundational sense, I suppose, to make sure that what we're reading is right, what we're consuming is not just utter nonsense.
Right.
And I feel like that also needs a time and a place, right? Like you can't be doing that every single time of the day.
No, because sometimes you just see something passively. I'll just maybe see a headline and then I'll think about it all day and be like, Mom, did you see blah, 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 blah? And then what I said was completely not true. She's like, what are you even talking about? And I'm like, oh, because maybe I saw it in passing and got the information wrong, but then I'm spreading it.
Yeah.
So it's just little things like that.
Yeah, because I think
there's not time to fact check, like you said.
Right. And I think the way like headlines are written today as well, it's sort of like you just fixate on the headline, right? You see the headline and you think you know what it is, but then when you read through the entire article, I guess there's a little more nuance in it.
Right.
That you wouldn't know if you just read the headline.
Exactly.
And if you just read the headline and started talking about it, you're essentially just going off of the headline. And
right. And I know I'm super guilty of just going off headline because it just looks like a tweet. You just read it and it's like 100 and it's like, okay, that's all I needed to know because that's all I get from, Twitter.
Right.
So it's very interesting to like train your brain to not think like that and to not make those snap decisions of being like, oh, I understand everything from 5 words.
Yeah. No, I do the same thing too a lot of the times, and I have to sort of catch myself. I'm not doing a great job at it, I'll be honest, but probably should do a better job. Moving away from the news, what do you do in your free time generally?
In my free time, so since I stopped school, stopped writing essays in my free time, I've really gotten into gaming. I was never a big gamer. I had a Nintendo DS, but I got really into like handheld PCs. Like I've got a PC computer that looks like a Nintendo Switch, so it's handheld and it can hook up to an external monitor, but it's about this big. And it's got a screen and everything built into it. So that's kind of what I've been doing in my free time. Otherwise, it's just trying to spend time with family and dogs.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I would say it is just too hot to really think about doing much else in your free time.
Right. I mean, it's very hot during the summers over here. I feel like it's gotten hotter over time.
Yes, absolutely. You're not just imagining that.
But it's way too hot to be outside right now. What about gaming interests you?
It was something I think I always wanted to do as a kid, but it was just not super encouraged. I had like a Wii and a DS, but I just never I never had that much money because it's an expensive hobby.
Yeah.
And so I just never had that kind of money. I had a PS3 and lightning struck our house and it fried itself. So that wasn't very long lived. But since I make a little bit of money, I was like, hey, I'd like to do this. So it's a really nice time to just unplug. I play a lot of they're called cozy games. So it's like farming simulator or like house decorating. So that's kind of like where I found this is what I like to do every night.
Interesting. What's the game I'm thinking of? I guess, is it Township? I don't know.
Township?
It's like a mobile game that you can play. Like, I guess you're farming and you can sell your stuff. I know I played it for like a week. I was like, I'm addicted to it more than I should be. So I just stopped playing it. But no, there are games out there that are definitely I guess, for the lack of a better word, they help you switch off.
Yes. That it's like very repetitive and you control everything that you can see on your screen and it has nothing to do with the real world. It's not stressful. So that's why I like them.
Do you think, you just mentioned something about the real world, and I guess that took me to a very tangential thought. I guess we could kind of explore it. Do you think people are generally trying to avoid living in the real world today?
Yes, because there are so many avenues to do so. I mean, think about like what Apple's trying to develop with Apple. Is it Glass? Is it called Apple Glass? I think so.
Like their version of the Oculus?
Vision Pro. Yeah,
okay,
the Apple Vision Pro, and then you have the Oculus. And I mean, I know Google Glass didn't make it, but they were trying a few years ago. So it's just like you have so many things that completely detach you from reality. Where as long as I'm looking at a monitor, I can look over and be like, oh, here's my family, here's my dog, here's wherever. Where those things are just on your face. You cannot detach unless you physically take it off. And with our phones, we're so invested in what's happening on that, like we've been talking about. So I think it's a big thing to not live your real life. Because I'm also very much into Disney worlds, and I don't know if you've heard the term Disney adult.
No.
But there's a lot of people kind of around our age. I would say it's mostly older Gen Z to millennial.
Okay.
That probably went to Disney World as kids, and now they're like going there as adults. And I'm one of those people, but there are some people that are really into it. And I think that that's another form of escapism that's maybe not so directly related to like video games or digital media, because there are people that dedicate their whole lives to planning like the perfect Disney trip, perfect outfits, knowing the foods, knowing the like wait times and stuff. And because I love Disney World, this is like all my Facebook is like Disney content and how to navigate Disney World. So that's something I've been introduced to recently.
Navigate it as in like I've heard that there's like long lines.
Yes.
And, so like trying to get into the weeds about like how you could get
it. So like if you start at this ride at this time, you can go to this ride this time. Short waits, long waits, here, there, or whatever. Just trying to like maximize your time for your money. And there are people that like strategize about that for hours.
Interesting. I guess that exists with many different things if you look at it that way. But I've never heard of this one.
No, I'm planning a Disney trip in the fall, so I've been looking up stuff because I'm just like, I want to know what kind of food, because I'm going with, I have dietary restrictions and I'm going with someone that does, so I want to be prepared. But yeah, my algorithm has just been feeding me all this Disney adult content, and I'm like, oh man, this is a lot bigger than I ever dreamed.
Right, because there's a difference between Disney World and Disneyland.
Disneyland's in California, Disney World is in Florida.
What is the difference between the two?
Disney World is older, and there's 4 parks. Disneyland is newer, and it has 2 parks. So Disney World is a lot bigger, a lot more humid. It's a lot hotter. They have a lot more at Disney World, so there's just a lot more you have to think about when planning a trip.
Yeah, because I guess they have like similar ones for like Universal Studios, right?
Yeah, I think the Universal Studios, I've never been to Universal, but the one in Orlando and the one in California, I think are pretty similar, that they have the kind of the same things. But I know like, I've just recently found out copyright law keeps certain things at Disneyland versus Disney World. Like Disneyland has like the Avengers and Marvel, but they legally can't bring that to Disney World for some reason. I just read that like a day ago, a headline, so I haven't looked that up yet, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is interesting. I mean, because it is a Disney product.
It is, yeah. The MCU is. I could get maybe if they were like Spider-Man has to stay in California because maybe they had a contract with Sony, but all the rest of those characters I would think. No idea.
Interesting. I guess with the world that we live in now, you can create an industry out of literally anything, right? Like blogging about the best way to get through Disney World is definitely going to interest people who are...
Oh yeah, and people make money off of it because Disney... So the price of your Disney vacation actually includes a free travel agent that they price the tickets assuming that you will bring a travel agent in to help you plan your trip. And so Disney pays travel agents to do all that, but you as the consumer do not pay them. So I think that's very interesting. So people do make quite a bit of money blogging, making content, and being a travel agent for Disney.
Are these travel agents, I mean, I know you said Disney pays them, but are they like directly employed by Disney, or are these just like...
I think so.
Wow. I mean, it's not something that I've thought of, so just sort of blowing my mind. But I guess it makes sense, right? Because by having people post content about it and talk about it and just spread so much information about it, you're able to build that interest amongst people who are interested about stuff like this, and that'll get them in the door.
And my theory in the back of my head is that Disney has become super expensive. It is not like it was 10 or 15 years ago when I was a kid, and it was kind of like $90 a day or whatever. It's a lot more than that. But I think that they're trying to appeal to the generation of millennials to older Gen Z that have money, kind of they work full-time jobs, but they don't have kids because less and less people in that age range are having kids. So if you have a lot of kids, Disney's kind of not on the table anymore like it used to be. So they're trying to capture that market of people that just want to go to Disney World for nostalgia's sake, and they're willing to pay those prices to relive it. And I'm one of those people, but it worked on me. But it's, in my opinion, worth it. But I think that's where all this Disney adult marketing is coming from and why the algorithm has been so intense with it.
Interesting. How different is it right now? You said it was $90 a day 10 years back, 15 years back?
It depends on the day. So it depends on the time of year you go and which day of the week you go. So like Tuesdays are cheaper than Saturdays.
Okay.
Saturdays could maybe run you anywhere between $137 to $156 a day. Or like a Tuesday might be like $120, $117. I know like in September when we're going, it's hurricane season. So it's $80 a day. So that's pretty good. But you had to book at least 3 days and go in the middle of September. So not super accessible to people with families.
Right. Oh, so it's not necessarily that you could finish the entire thing in a day.
Yeah.
And do you like buy them as packages, or can you finish it in a day?
No. If you want to see everything, you have to go for at least 4 because there's 4 parks. But if you're just there, like I've been for one day and I just go to one park, go to one event, and it's nice. It's totally fine. This is my first time doing all 4 parks.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, because it's not something I'm generally curious of in terms of like wanting to go and explore. Like, I guess the logistics of it all and how it all works.
It's very interesting to me after having planned multiple international trips that going to Disney World almost seems more intense, like with the content that's out there and like how to plan and how to travel and just what I've had to do for my friends and I versus like going to Japan. Like, I feel like I did less.
Can you elaborate on that a little further?
So it's just the amount of, like I said, that there is content on Disney World for everything from what food, how you ask for dietary restrictions, where you should wait in line and where you shouldn't, when you should go, when you should wake up. I mean, there's whole guides being like, you wake up at 5, workout, be at the buses at 6. I mean, like they have whole itineraries that are like by 30 minutes. There's a new service called Lightning Lane Plus, and it replaced Fast Pass, which has been replaced by Genie Plus. And there's people that help you navigate that and apps that you can pay for that book your lightning lanes for. I mean, it's all this. Where Japan, I really struggled to find anything about like, where should I eat in Tokyo? Where should I stay? Is this okay to do? Is this not okay? There just wasn't a lot of videos on YouTube, Facebook, or anything about it. Just kind of went in blind and it turned out okay. So I think that's very interesting that.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe Disney World is more accessible to a market than Japan is, but I would say that maybe even about England or Europe. And I feel like a lot of Americans that travel internationally go to Europe.
Right.
So it's just interesting, I think.
Wow. Huh. What is Genie Plus?
So used to be back in the day, if you wanted to skip the line at Disney World, you went to a ride and got a Fast Pass. And you came back at the time the Fast Pass was, said, and you would basically just walk to the front of the ride. And then once you used a Fast Pass, you could go to another ride and get another. And it was like maybe one every hour or two.
I see.
Genie Plus came in and you had to pay for it. So you paid based on the crowd level, the day, and what park you were at. So maybe it was an extra $25, maybe 17, depending on crowd levels. And then that you would book your Fast Passes through your phone. But you could only use so many. And if they were sold out for the day, then too bad you couldn't use your service. But now it's being replaced by Lightning Lane multi something, I don't know, but it's called Lightning Lane Plus. But the biggest change to that one is that you can book your Fast Passes in advance, and people outside of America cannot book them in advance. So if you are Canadian or you are coming from the UK, can't book it.
Oh, so would you have to be here?
Yeah, you would have to physically be in America because you're allowed to like book your Fast Passes now 7 days in advance if you're staying on property, or 3. But if you're outside of the United States, 7 days in advance, can't book. So you officially land and your like phone says you're in America.
So essentially, if you want to be able to use that feature, you'd have to be here at least 7 days before you want to go to Disney.
Or like have an American friend, because they could maybe go. Your travel agent, I don't think, can book them, so they couldn't even contact an American travel agent to do that for them.
Can you not use a VPN?
I've heard it's kind of like Netflix. This is just what I've heard. I don't know that if they catch you using it, you get like a slap on the wrist, you know?
Oh, okay. I guess that makes sense. Because I guess they're all just trying to maximize the amount of money they make. So
yeah, and a lot of people that go to Disney maybe. Well, I'm in a few Facebook groups, and a lot of people are very uninformed about VPNs. They think they're dangerous. So I think it's just kind of like people not generally understanding what a VPN is as well.
We sort of talked about a lot of things that like like there's a lot of thoughts firing in my head. The one thing that I think about, I mean, and everybody's different, so it's probably not the best way to sort of categorize it as a generation entirely. But I do feel like our generation is more inclined to have a fixed plan when they're traveling versus just figuring out as you get there.
Right.
And I don't know, as I'm talking out loud about it, I wonder if that sort of kills the joy of exploring and like accepting what comes your way.
Right.
Have you thought about that?
I think so. So I'm the person that likes to have a plan.
Yeah, me too.
I love having a plan when I travel. It stresses me out when someone doesn't have a plan. But I do know that there's been some times on vacation where I've stressed myself out to the point where I don't want to do anything anymore. And that's not why I paid, money to be somewhere besides my house. I can stress myself out on my own time,
you can do it for free.
Yeah. So it's definitely been like a learning curve of like learning how to not do that, how to just let things go. But I think, the more and more, like I said, I don't disconnect from my phone and I'm looking up. Like when I was going to Japan and I was constantly looking stuff up and being like, well, will my party like this? Will everybody enjoy this? Can we eat here? Can we not eat here? Is this open? Is this going to, do this or that? So it was just a lot of stress. It would have been nicer to let that all go. And I realized that. So the most relaxing day I had was when a typhoon came in and we couldn't leave our hotel.
Because I don't know, it's interesting, I guess, to sort of also think about it as a thought exercise of how involved we want to be and how informed we want to be, and at the same time, how much control we want over those things.
Right.
Because I think it comes down to some extent, I guess we could say, like I could say this, I guess we're both control freaks in a way. And it sort of worries us when we don't have a fixed plan so I guess it eases that way, but then if something goes wrong, kind of like you said, it's sort of like, oh, what do I do now? Kind of thing. Is it like, I guess, actively something that you're trying to change, or?
I think so. I think I'm trying to live a little bit more in the moment. That hasn't happened very well, but it's something that I realize about myself and try to communicate to other people, at least being like, hey, I am aware that I have these issues I'm dealing with. And so I just think as long as maybe everybody also knows, it's not going to catch anybody out of left field either. So people are willing to travel with me again, hopefully.
Right. The other thing you sort of mentioned about like how Disney is targeting a specific demographic of its audience. And again, if you don't want to explore this, it's completely fine. But you mentioned how their ideal, I guess, audience is people our age without kids.
Yeah.
And you also sort of mentioned that people our age are not necessarily having as many kids. Do you have an opinion on that?
I have a little bit of an opinion just because I've known for a long time that that's not part of what I want for my life. And so I've had to examine like, why is that? And I think it's so hard to think about with the economy now, like I may never be able to afford a house. They say most Gen Zs in our age bracket, we shouldn't move out, that if we live with our parents, to stay put. Because interest rates are so high that, you have to think about insurance and maintenance. I mean, I know in 1 week, like our dryer, washer, we got a flat, they all broke, and it's just like, I could never dream of spending that much money on my own because I don't make that much money. So I just think it's harder for people my age to think about having kids in the way people a few generations back thought about having kids. Because there's just not a lot of support for kids anymore in our system, that everything is so expensive. I also think that maybe people that might have thought about having kids have seen how the workforce has reacted to people that are like, hey, I need to work remote. And they're like, actually, no, you need to come into the office. That we're moving away from like making even like work accessible to people that may want to have kids but can't afford daycare. So I just think there's a lot of things going on in the world that make people a little afraid or like unsure. Like, will I have enough support economically, and socially to have a child.
Right. And I think this is something else that sort of maybe is not so much an experience male might have, but a female might have in the workspace of if they have kids, and then I know it's probably in some circles like you need to be of a certain age and maybe unmarried or things like that support your growth in the field more than if you are married and have kids, because then employers are like, oh, you're committed to that more than you are to this, and yada yada yada. And that's unfortunate too, right? Because who's to say that someone who has kids is not as committed, or maybe even more committed to their work, but they're able to like take care of their kids at the same time, because I guess the worrying thing about that for parts of the Western world and places like, I guess, Japan and Korea, I guess, and China to some extent as well, like they now have an age ratio. And I think India will go through this at some point as well, because right now we have a very young population, but I think people my age, if they stop having kids, we're going to go through this cycle a few years down the road, a few decades down the road, maybe down the lane. Because I guess there's going to be more older people here and in Japan and in Korea. I think I heard about Korea more recently, but I've heard
that about Korea. Yeah, I read that the government is encouraging women to have kids. That they're saying like, "What do you need? You need to have kids."
Right. And I guess as a species, also it makes sense, right? Because I think as a species on this planet, that is sort of a goal, right? But I think as we've sort of lived in a material world, we sort of seek other things as our way to fulfill ourselves, right? Having kids necessarily doesn't need to be the only way to, like, I guess, seek fulfillment.
And I think that's becoming a more popular idea, which I think is why you see that deviation from having kids. I also think, I've been hearing for years, and I'm sure other people my age have, that the divorce rate is 50%. And so I think that might be in the back of other people's minds being like, well, if we have kids and the divorce rate is 50%, that's a pretty high percentage. So I've heard friends of mine say that as well, being like, this is a concern that we would have if we were to, be in a serious committed relationship and then have a kid. So it's just a lot of different things. I think it depends on the person, what angle you kind of come from.
Right. And I think the other thing, again, I might need to fact check myself on this, but the thing about that divorce rate being 50%, I think that also includes people who've had multiple divorces, right?
I'm not 100% sure. You'd have to check that too.
I'll have to check that, because I feel like that I've heard, I think the divorce lawyer I was listening to on a podcast sort of mentioned that, or maybe it wasn't the divorce lawyer himself, but the person who was interviewing him that mentioned that. I can't remember right now, but that number is skewed in a way, I guess, is what I've heard. I might be wrong again, but I guess that's what I've heard. But I do feel like generally, and this is something that I've had thoughts about recently as well, like we, as a generation, I think, live with a lot of fear. Not saying that you should go in and just like not give a shit about anything, and just like, do whatever, but like the thought of that itself is quite scary, of like not knowing what, like, and just sort of throwing yourself into the deep end. But I guess with that fear and like wanting to have so much control over our circumstances and situations and so on and so forth, I guess, do you think we're setting ourselves up for failure?
I don't know if it's failure. I think it's just figuring out a new society, that everything is now new, and it's just, we have no idea what's going to happen. So I wouldn't say it's failure just yet.
Sure.
I would say we're just maybe setting ourselves up for a different normal, a different way of thinking about things. Like we've been talking about control ever since we brought up video games. Is like those are control. Planning our trips is control. And I had a point. Oh, but I just think that there are so many other ways that you can fulfill those needs in your life. Like my dog, Bruce, I used to bring him up in clothes, and, they market stuff to dogs now that usually would just be for babies. That I could buy a whole wardrobe for my dogs, a stroller for my dog.
Really? You could buy a stroller too?
Yep.
Wow.
I could. There's someone on my street that has a dog stroller.
Oh, wow.
And it like has even a little like part you put over it to keep the dog cool. So I don't have a stroller for my dog, but I could. I could have that whole experience of buying all these things that would be for babies, but for my dog. So there would be no reason really for me to ever want to have a baby, because if I did say, oh, well, I just want to dress something up, I can put socks and shoes and clothes on my dog. I can take him to restaurants pretty much now. You can take your dogs a lot of places. They have bars with dog parks now. There's 2 of them in Oklahoma City now. So you could take your dog to the bar if you wanted to. And they have singles nights at the dog bars. They have bingo nights. They've got, karaoke, live music, food. So you can do life with your dog.
Wow.
And that's another huge market.
Right. I guess this dog stroller thing is sort of, again, blowing my mind, because
I can't believe you've never seen one.
No, I don't think I have.
I see them around town all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Because generally, I think I've had the idea that when you're, I guess, taking your dog out, you want your dog to walk, because that's also like...
Well, it's a little hot. My dog has a little smushed nose, and maybe it's too hot for his little paws, but I still want to take, just whatever.
Fair.
People may think, yeah.
You're right. I guess you can, it can be useful in some places. I mean, I'm not a dog person, owner, so I wouldn't know. But I don't know. I guess it sort of seems counterintuitive, and I guess it's because some conditioning on my part as well, because... generally...
Oh, no, I was raised as well. A dog is a dog. And so I've gone a little bit into but he's so cute in his pajamas. But a stroller is a little too over the line for me with the way I was raised. But yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Sorry, it's taking me a second to register that. Wow. That's so funny. I mean, the clothes thing I get. I've seen people even have Halloween costumes designed.
Oh yeah, my dog has a Stark Halloween costume. It was $3. It was the best purchase.
Right. So there's a lot of those things that I guess make life enjoyable in a daily, or when you look at it from the perspective of the everyday life, right? Because I remember speaking to one of my classmates on the podcast, and she was talking about how I guess we were exploring the idea of people in the West and in America generally preferring to have those relationships with dogs versus people, because people are much more pricklier, for the lack of a better word.
You can control a dog a little easier than you can another human.
Right. And I guess let's explore that. What do you think about that? In terms of the relationships that people share with dogs versus humans?
I think they've changed a lot again since COVID, because COVID, you had a dog, you had something, you had something you could connect to, and dogs are very emotional creatures.
Right.
I know when I was going through therapy dog training with Bruce, my trainer kept telling me, you cannot project human emotions onto him. You can't think, oh, he's just a little baby and he looks sad and I've got to give him a treat. That is not how dogs really function, but humans believe that. I believe that my dog can understand what I'm saying most of the time, because I say it and he goes and does something and I'm shocked. I'm like, how did you know what I was saying? How did you know how I was feeling? How did I know how you were feeling? So it's just, I don't know. It's just, I think dogs really... I think Americans have always loved dogs. It's always been part of the American dream to have a dog and a yard and a white picket fence. But I think since COVID that people have just really latched on to their dogs. And the market has just kind of taken off with it. Because they fulfill a lot of needs.
Right.
I think that people have in their lives. If they are too afraid or don't want to go connect with other humans. And that's hard. With my last few semesters at school, I took remote classes. So I never connected to any professors or any other students. My workspace is hybrid. So that means I maybe don't see my coworkers as much as I would have pre-COVID if I had been working there.
Right.
But every day my dog is there. When I'm remote, my dog is there. So I can see how people fall into this trap of my dog replaces that human interaction I might normally have.
Right. I guess the thing that worries me a little bit about that is at the end of the day, we are social creatures and we need human connection, right? To what end are we going to be able to do that? At some point, I guess diminishing returns is not the right term there, but maybe
I get what you mean. And I do think there are things society needs to do to move us away from that point.
Right.
Because otherwise it's I didn't have a choice on my remote classes. So there was no option to go connect with classmates. That, gas is so expensive that if I can choose not to drive to maybe go out at night after driving to work and back, stay home with my dog.
Right.
So it's just things in society that have to kind of fall into place to get people away from that way of thinking, for sure.
Since you mentioned that, how much of it do you think is collective societal responsibility versus how much of it is personal responsibility as well?
I think it's 50-50. Right. I think you have to be self-motivated to do anything. That self-motivation is so important. Right. That you have to tell yourself, like, I need to leave the house today. Yeah. Like today, this is my only plan for today. And my mom's like, I'm surprised you said yes. And I'm like, I need to get out of the house to see somebody that, does not live with me. And it'll be fun, something new. Right. But it takes a lot of effort for me to like want to do those things in advance, if that makes sense, because I've just gotten so used to staying at home.
Right. I don't think I've said this openly because it's something I started doing recently. I have like a habit tracker, and one of the things I put on that was step outside of the house. And I mean, every day I step outside, generally speaking, because I'm going to work or I'm going to school. Right. And so on. But during the weekends, especially, I noticed myself just curling up in bed for most of the day, or just staying at home, not stepping out. Right. And like neither of my roommates are here, so I'm the only one in my house right now, and it can get super boring. So even if it's not to meet anybody, just step outside and go for a walk or something like that, I feel like definitely helps as well. So yeah, I agree a lot with what you said about a lot of it. Has to come from like being motivated to want to do that. Right. Because it's very easy to let YouTube just take the rest of your day. Because I've had those days. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. There have been days where I've spent hours and hours on YouTube. I mean, and those days are important. You have to reset. You have to be alone. But it's like, I know pre-2019, my life was a lot more like 80% out, 20% at home. And now it's become a lot more like 80% at home, 20% out. And that 20% is kind of reluctant. So it's just kind of keeping that in mind to make sure it doesn't become 100% reluctant to do anything. But yeah, that comes from me and not so much from society. Yeah, because some of it also is like finding community, right? And I think the one thing that I guess we had good experiences of in terms of being involved in like these circles is that we had that community. And I guess that's the one thing that I guess worried is not the right word, but I do notice that difference in myself of like how involved I was previously versus how involved I am now, and how much that's taken away from me just interacting with people. Oh yeah, I mean, it used to be on a daily basis for us. We'd see friends, and I think that's maybe where the big post-graduation struggle has been, is that my community was tied to that job. So when I was no longer in that job, I did not develop those skills to find community because it just was there. It was like built into everything I did. So now it's really hard because I have to think about like, I won't know anybody if I go here to try to make friends. And that was not my experience for 5 years of my life. Right. Or like my workspace, we were all the same age. We all had something in common. We were all in school, all interested in, culture and education and all that. But now it's like, maybe everybody's 10 years older than me and we don't have similar backgrounds. And so it's just hard to connect with people in the way that we all connected back here at UCO. Right, for sure. Because that's something that I think hugely impacted my experience in Colorado as well. Because other than the colleagues I worked with and the people who worked in the clinic that I worked in, I didn't see anybody else. Right. And the roommates that I lived with, we all had different times of work and so on and so forth. So we'd barely interact. So, and that like did affect me a lot. So, I think that ability to be able to seek community also takes, I guess, some learning, because that's a skill in itself, right? It's a skill, and it's a skill I think a lot of people lost, because they went from high school straight to college during COVID and maybe like lost that ability to learn how to make adult friends that first year of being in college. Right. And I think that was hugely impactful to how our society is when it comes to the younger generations going forward. I know that there's just certain expectations that maybe we had because we were in college before 2020 that other students just never experienced. But I think it's harder for us as well because we're transitioning from being in college to like real adults in a post-COVID world. And it's just not anything like we were taught it would be when we were maybe 18. And it's just a lot harder to find that community. Like even people who were maybe out in the communities before COVID would say the same thing. Yeah. I guess the one positive, like the internet and like the communities that exist online, is that first they sort of fill that void in a way. But I think they shouldn't necessarily entirely take away from like physical aspects of that, or like just meeting people in person. But I also think that if the community is big enough, you're able to make spaces to where you can meet in certain cities and so on. And I think that's something that some content creators are also like doing that actively. Like I follow a couple of people who like do meetups in Austin and so on. I think they live in Austin.
I know what you're talking about. There's a few in Oklahoma City that I kind of look at and I'm like, oh, that looks fun, but I'm not going.
Right.
I have to like sit and watch from the internet for a while.
Right. And yeah, some of that is also like the willingness to be open to it, right? In some sense. And not to say that we're not open to it, but I think some of that is also getting comfortable or getting to a point where we feel comfortable to like be around those people. And
and I think it's just concern that it's out of our control as well, because we're being vulnerable, meeting new people, and will they like me? And I was talking to a friend recently about like, if I went to this group, how do I know that the conversation isn't going to be all politics? To go back to our first, because that's how the internet is, and that's kind of where we're socially conditioned now. So it's like, well, what if they don't agree with me? What if that's what's brought up and I don't agree with XYZ? And so I think that sometimes that's what I overthink about is, will I like these people and then find out we're fundamentally different? And that's a huge fear because it's out of my control.
Right. But I guess on the flip side, as you were sort of talking about that, the one thought that came to my mind was, I guess we always have the choice to walk away, right? I think some of it also is trial and error in some sense. We're going to have to try and find community. We're probably going to fail a couple of times, but that's okay. I guess it's sort of like a constant figuring out, see what works and so on and so forth. Because I think the one thing that I've heard people talk about this, but I think you realize it once you experience it, or I guess you understand it much better once you've experienced it, is that it's very likely that the people you went to college with, you're never going to see again after you graduate, because they move away. And I think that experience holds true for us too, right? Like the people who were here, I guess one person I can think of is Hazik, who's been on the show and he's not moved away, right? Like if we're in Dubai, we might see him, but likelihood of that, I don't know, not that likely, right? So it's things like that. I think when you sort of move away and like grow older, your circles change. And I think there's that constant need to be able to get yourself into those different circles. And I think I don't know if it's a struggle per se, but I think it is.
I think it's more of a struggle now than it would be in the past. Because in the past, we may have graduated college and gone right into like a married circle, like where all our friends are in the same stage of life. Where now there's a lot of gap. There's a lot of choices. There's a lot of different circles you could find yourself in. So it's just figuring out which one you are comfortable in and where you find your people. So I just think it's a learning curve towards the new future we're kind of shaping.
For sure. Maybe this is a general question that you can expand to other things if you want to. But do you think that in the age that we live in today, we're spoiled for choice?
I think so. Yeah, because you have a choice on everything. I mean, you walk into the store and there's like 50 different kinds of bread, or maybe there was just one because it was your local baker in the past and you just chose that one. So I do think ever since, I can remember, we've always had a choice. And now we have a choice of, well, which streaming service do you want? What kind of phone do you want? What kind of college do you want? It's just everything is a choice. So I do think we're kind of spoiled for it. So then when we don't have the choices we want presented to us, like in community, if there's not an immediate group that's like, that sounds good, I think that's where we kind of struggle a bit.
Because I guess a lot of those things also condition us to view things a certain way, right? Because the one thing I'm also starting to realize a lot is the way I might view one thing is not necessarily going to be the same way I view something else. So it shouldn't be, because the factors there that make it what it is very different from this thing over here. So some level of detachment is required.
Exactly.
To be able to not necessarily superimpose those beliefs onto every single thing. Because some places you have to be open to anything that comes your way. Some other places you might have to be rigid about it. Like, for example, I guess the one thing I'm thinking of, like as we're talking about this, is, for example, if you don't want to involve yourself in circles that do drugs. I don't know why that's the example that came to my mind, but you can keep yourself out of it. But I guess you can't take that same principle when it comes to joining circles and avoiding conversations, because you don't really know how people think and what they might have to say or what their background is and so on and so forth. So some of that you have to experience. And then,
and I think we're really losing that skill that you just talked about like like you said, drugs, that's a hard line. Like,
right.
no, but having conversations, I think that's something that we're slowly moving away from even having with other people, because we're so afraid that we might say something that, or like, that is wrong. That is this, you're being canceled, the cancel culture kind of thing. So I think that's another reason that it's so hard to find community, because that's always in the back of your head. And it's a skill that sadly people are losing. When you have politicians that ban, certain things, then you're like, well, can we even talk about it? Should we even talk about it? Or is it just going to circle back to political views?
Right. Do you think as humans today, we're more worried, and maybe this applies to the space that we're in or the area that we're in, do you think people worry more about offending someone or worry more about being offended themselves?
I think it depends on who you are. I think that is like an individual. I do think a lot of people think about what they say a lot, and I think people walk on eggshells. I know I have to with certain people just because I don't want to offend them. And maybe I disagree with them, but they're not going to know that. But I do think a lot of people actively avoid situations where they think they will be triggered, offended, because that's so common on the internet. Again, that is so commonplace on the internet that's like just an expected rule, that you don't trigger people or you don't offend people, because cancel culture will come get you. But in real life, it's a little different, translates a little differently.
Yeah. And I guess it goes back to the same point that we were making a second ago, right? Like, you can't superimpose what happens on the internet to real life, because that's not real life.
Right.
Because depending on the things that you consume and the videos that you watch, it's very easy to get into an echo chamber of the type of content you watch and like the community that content breeds. So you can't necessarily superimpose that into the entire work, because I don't know why this is the example that's coming to mind right now, but I guess the huge example that applies to society today, I think, is like the bullshit that you see people like Andrew Tate and so on talk about, right? And how people just pick that up and sort of superimpose that to everybody. But that's not true, right?
No.
Once you sort of put yourself out there, you realize that people are very different, and not everybody's going to be that way, and not everybody needs to be that way either. You don't have to be a top G. I hate that term. But it's just interesting to sort of look at how, I guess from like a zoomed out perspective, how we apply a lot of these things. Because I've noticed this happen to me too a lot. Like if I'm, say for example, like if I'm watching more money related content, I'm focused more on money, and like I'm doing everything that sort of is influenced by that. Versus if I'm watching more food related content, I'm thinking a lot about food, and I sort of impose that into my real life and so on and so forth. So very important to make that separation in a lot of ways. I guess this sort of has been talked about in some sense, but what are echo chambers of content that you find yourself in, other than news
Disney.
and Disney?
I would say I have a lot of dog content for sure, because I see dogs that look like mine. I'm like, oh, that looks like my dog. So obviously they recommend me more of those videos. I'd say a lot of food content, especially local food content, which is great. I love seeing local places, and a lot of travel content. I pretty much get all travel content, I would say, between that and food, and some gaming. Some gaming content is slowly kind of making its way, especially like that cozy gaming I talked about, with like desk setups and stuff. I get a lot of those kind of videos as well.
Since you mentioned travel, what's the place you want to travel to, if you can, right now?
If I could get on a plane right now and go anywhere, it would be Japan.
Again,
I know I just went there, but I went with UCO, and I'd like to go without UCO.
Sure.
So I was there for 2 weeks, with my mom and my sister. I was so exhausted because there was so much that happened that I just did not expect, that I was so worn out by that point. And I had another 2 weeks to go, and I'd already been there 2 weeks. I'd like to go back and just experience it.
Right. Because I think going on a study tour is very different, right?
Yes, it's very structured, very, very much out of the students' control.
Right.
Because we had a lot of issues with like heat sickness. We had a lot of issues with kids getting overwhelmed, because it is very overwhelming. It was very hot. It was very different. Just a lot of things we didn't expect. It was hard to find water. Like, I know I tried forever to find water, and I saw something that said H2O on it. It was not water. It was like Gatorade. So for like the whole first day, I had no water because the one vending machine I knew how to find was out of water. So it's just, things like that I would like to go back and say, I know where to get water the first day. So I'm not going to be dehydrated and, miserable for the next 2 days.
Yeah.
So definitely like going on my own where a little bit more of that control is in my court, and go enjoy it. Now I know what to expect as well. I can relax a little more.
No, and that's cool, right? Because I think the one thing that I think about too, like, I would love to go back to the places that I've been to.
Yeah.
In some sense. For example, when my parents came down a few years back, they'd booked a tour with a touring company.
Yeah.
And we went to parts of New York, parts of LA, and so on.
Oh, fun.
But we didn't necessarily get to stay there.
Yeah.
Right? And soak the city in for what it is.
Right.
Because they take you to the touristy spots and then you're out.
Of course.
So I guess the same thing sort of applies even when you're going on study tours and so on. You go to fixed places and you're not able to soak the city in or the place in for what it is. Going by yourself, you can plan whatever you want and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then just
you can go a little bit off the beaten path.
Right. I guess there's some lines to draw there as well, like how far off the beaten path you go.
Yeah, not like dangerous or like disrespectful off the beaten path, but you can get out of Tokyo.
Right. I was reminded of some video I watched of some people driving somewhere in South America where they probably shouldn't have gone.
No promotion of that. Yeah, no.
Right. Yeah. Because you want to be able to keep yourself safe too.
Right.
I'm reminded of that study tour story of the UK, but we probably shouldn't go there.
Yeah. We'll keep that off camera.
But I feel like people nowadays are more so interested in traveling.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the case before.
No, they call it COVID revenge travel. So there is a term for it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it's called COVID revenge. And I think that they coined that in like 2021, but it's stuck. That because there are so many people traveling that I know the news is saying like for this July 4th holiday that it's a record number of people expected to travel. And I know they have said that for every holiday since 2020.
Wow.
That like every holiday it's like record number. So that just means more and more people are traveling. So I do think people are more interested in it. I think the world's a little more open. Right now, I think people just maybe sat on the internet and looked at things they wanted to do. And now they're actually going to do them because you never know when borders might be shut again or something might happen where it's like, you cannot leave the United States. You can't leave your house.
Yeah.
So I think people are trying to get it out there and thinking like my money will come back, but these experiences may not. So I do think there's definitely a big uptick in travel. I mean, you see that I went to Arizona and Utah for the first time this summer with my family, and there was just people everywhere we went. So many people. I mean, I was hiking out in the middle of nowhere, and there was just hundreds of people, which is great for the economy, and it's great that people are out traveling with their families. I love to see that, but you almost can't go anywhere now without there being like 1,000 people there with you. Because I know in Japan that has definitely been the case. I went right as like a week after the borders opened, and the COVID restrictions were dropped. So it was crowded because it's Japan and it's just densely populated, but it wasn't as crowded as I think now because their currency has dropped. It is cheap for Americans to go to Japan now. I think it's like $1 to like 1.6 yen. I mean, it's a crazy exchange rate right now. So there's a lot of people in Japan where they've closed off certain areas of Japan to tourists because there are just too many of them that don't understand, like etiquette rules. So I do think a lot of people are traveling just because sometimes the economy does work in our favor.
Right. Maybe this is a morbid question, but because you sort of mentioned that it's, I guess the term coined for it is COVID revenge.
Yeah, revenge travel.
Do you think some of that is dictated off this sense of knowing that, I guess, the YOLO way of living, or like knowing that we're potentially going to die sooner?
I think so, because I know I've made the joke of like, we should go back to Europe before Putin blows it up. So I know that's so dark, but I have said that, being like, hey, we should go here before it's gone, or before we are locked out of it, because maybe Americans, it's just too much of a risk.
Yeah.
I went to Cairo in 2013, and I've been wanting to go back ever since, but that has just not been a possibility. Even when we were there, we had an armed bodyguard because the embassy dictated it.
Yeah.
So I just think people are getting out before the world becomes a little more dangerous or a little more inaccessible. Because already big countries that, maybe someone wants to visit Moscow. You cannot go to Russia as an American anymore. You can't really go to China. I mean, you can, but it's a lot harder and a lot more. You have to think about a lot more things before you go than in the past.
Yeah, it's crazy because I was speaking to one of my former colleagues from the clinic I worked in Colorado, and she is married to a Russian. Oh. So when they flew to Russia to see his family, I think they flew to Armenia or Azerbaijan or something from here, and then they went to Russia, and like that was the whole hassle of like before you could travel directly, but now because of the way, I guess, the whole
certain airlines won't fly over Russia anymore.
Right, exactly. So I think as we were talking about this and like sort of just thinking about the geopolitical landscape, in some sense we are, not every country is, but the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years were very much like globalization friendly. But now I guess everybody's sort of retreating to the opposite direction of like, oh no, our personal interests first. Which again, I can see both sides to it. Right. So I'm not saying that.
It's just an ebb and flow thing for sure.
Right. So I guess that will also influence how people want to travel and so on and so forth, like on a macro scale.
Right. And I just think, I mean, that's definitely interesting to think about. It's obviously a really interesting contradiction of people being like, well, I want to stay at home, and then people being like, no, I want to go halfway around the world. So I don't know if it's just because they get so bored at home that they're like, well, I have to go do adventures. And you don't really have to connect with anybody or traveling. Sure. It is very much a solitary activity if you want it to be. Yeah. You do not have to talk to anybody. You go to Japan and you don't have to talk to anybody except the person checking you out, at the cashier place. So I don't know. That's an interesting thing to think about.
It was just a thought that came to mind. So it's not really a cooked thought. Yeah. Maybe I need to marinate on that thought a little more.
But the point you brought up about travel, like connecting through one place you can't fly direct, that's a thing that's happening all over. So I know like there's been a lot of planes coming in and out of OKC. So there's not as many direct flights, and flights are more likely to get canceled. That's why we have rules that are going to be in place to protect people whose flights gets delayed. Pre-COVID, I never experienced a flight delay, and we used to fly Southwest all over the time. I mean, I've flown to Europe, never had an issue. Ever since COVID, I mean, we got delayed on the way back to Japan. They lost my mom's bags. It was just, I've never experienced that, and every single flight I've taken since has been delayed, or I've been out an extra day and have to call into work and be like, I'm not coming home. And have to deal with, like, that's almost something that's in your travel plans now.
Right. So, like having to bake some time in for possible delays and stuff.
That more people are traveling, but it's almost more inaccessible than ever in that sense.
Right. No, because you mentioning that reminded me of me being stuck in the Houston airport for 30 hours earlier this year.
I got stuck in Houston too.
Yeah, it was. So I flew in from, I'm forgetting where I flew in from. I mean, I was flying back from Singapore. That's where it was. Yeah, because my parents and we went there, and I got stuck at Houston because there was ice, I think, that day, or like the weather was bad. And I think I was rescheduled for 3 different flights, and all of them got canceled. So I remember spending 30 hours in the Houston airport. And the 4th one, which was the one that I took to come back here, also got delayed because I guess they didn't schedule staff.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, United.
We can say United. We can call them out because my issue was United too.
Right. They don't sponsor, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. But it's crazy. I think, kind of like you said, I don't think I've experienced that level of delay at all.
No.
I mean, that was weather, so I guess
that's out of the airline's control.
Right.
But
yeah. No, it's just crazy. Let's bring this to a gradual close. Okay. Any parting thoughts? Anything that you want to share?
No, it seems like our themes today were really internet, politics, and control, and kind of generational issues, which I think is very interesting because we talked about a really wide range of topics, but they all kind of circle back to those few key thoughts I have. So that tells me maybe what's on my mind, for sure. But it also tells me like things are a little more connected than I think they might be. All my thoughts about things, for sure.
Again, I'm no psychologist. Yeah. No psychologist. But I think a lot of it is also sort of subconscious conditioning to a large extent that influences a lot of things. And when you sort of zoom out and look at it, you probably catch that more.
Right.
Again, could be wrong. Not saying I'm right, but yeah, it's just interesting. Like the way we look at a lot of things, how that might just be conditioning
right.
of a lot of different things.
Right. Yeah.
And if you're not aware of how you're conditioned to sort of look at it that way, then I guess you sort of have to wait for some experiences to sort of teach you otherwise. And yeah. But anyway, thank you so much, Grace, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah.
Good. So yeah, thank you so much for those of you watching as well. I hope you enjoyed this very wide-ranging conversation. For those of you watching and listening, thank you so much. We will see you guys next time.